Welcome to Mill History Talk, the podcast where we explore the past to better understand the profession of arms today. We dive into the campaigns, conflicts, issues, and commanders that have shaped military thinking across centuries, and why it all still matters. Whether you're an officer in training, a seasoned professional, a student of strategy, or simply curious about how history informs modern warfare, this space is for you. Our mission is simple: to foster insight, reflection, and critical thinking primarily through the lens of military history. Before we begin, a quick note. The views expressed in this podcast are of the podcast writers, hosts, and guests, and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any government agency or organization. So, whether you're listening in a barracks, a lecture hall, at the gym, or in your car on the way to work, welcome. We're glad you're here. Quick question. Have you ever watched someone throw everything at a problem? Money, efforts, technology, consultants, spreadsheets, PowerPoint slides with aggressive arrows, and somehow still not solve the problem? Because if you have, congratulations. You already understand the U.S. air war in Vietnam. Welcome back to Mill History Talk, episode 53. I'm Hope, your guide through the chaos, contradictions, and uncomfortable truths history keeps trying to teach us, whether we ask for them or not.
And I'm Brian. Today we're tackling one of the biggest paradoxes of modern warfare: how the most extensive application of air power in history failed to deliver strategic victory.
We're talking over 8 million tons of bombs dropped between 1964 and 1973. More than all sides in World War II combined, thousands of sorties, cutting-edge aircraft, global attention, and yet North Vietnam wins.
It tells us that destruction and decision are not the same thing. Air power can generate enormous physical effects, but unless those effects are connected to a political mechanism that forces the enemy to change behavior, they don't produce strategic outcomes. And Vietnam is the clearest case where the United States confused activity with progress.
So, lots of motion, lots of noise, but no closure.
Exactly. The war became a demonstration of effort rather than a pathway to decision.
At the heart of this story is a belief, almost a hope, that air power could solve Vietnam cleanly. No massive ground war, no repeat of Korea, no Chinese intervention. Just enough pressure from the air to convince Hanoi to stop supporting the war in the South. Which, on paper, sounds elegant, very mid-century modern, very systems analysis will save us. Brian, what assumptions are hiding under that idea?
Several, and they're critical. First, that North Vietnam viewed the war as optional or adjustable. Second, that pain could be calibrated and controlled. And third, that escalation could be managed without fundamentally changing the character of the conflict. All three assumptions were flawed.
Because Hanoi wasn't weighing cost curves the way Washington was.
Correct. Hanoi wasn't asking, "Is this worth it?" They were asking, "How long can we endure?"
So escalation wasn't actually about forcing change, it was about managing anxiety.
Yes, escalation was shaped as much by domestic political fear as by military logic. Air power was expected to do something without forcing decision-makers to confront the full consequences of war.
Which brings us to the idea of gradual escalation, this belief that you could turn the pressure knob slowly and get a rational response. Brian, why does that sound reasonable, and why did it fail so badly here?
Gradual escalation assumes the enemy shares your risk calculus. It assumes they see limited signals as meaningful warnings rather than opportunities. But in Vietnam, gradualism did the opposite. It signaled restraint. It showed that U.S. leaders feared widening the war more than Hanoi feared absorbing damage.
So instead of, "we can make this worse," the message was, "we really don't want this to get worse."
Exactly. And once that signal is received, coercion collapses. Hanoi learned that patience was rewarded and that escalation ceilings existed. That learning process mattered more than any single strike.
So the war becomes less about punishment and more about waiting the other side out.
Yes, and air power, paradoxically, becomes part of the enemy's education.
That brings us directly to Operation Rolling Thunder, running from March 1965 to November 1968. It's often remembered as a bombing campaign, but it's better understood as a bureaucratic system. Targets approved in Washington, escalation debated week by week, geographic boundaries rigidly enforced. Brian, what did that do to military effectiveness?
It decoupled air power from strategy. Rolling Thunder wasn't designed to force an outcome. It was designed to preserve political control. That meant military effectiveness was always subordinate to escalation management.
Which is not usually how wars are won.
Number, and the enemy noticed. North Vietnam adapted rapidly. Industry was dispersed. Supply routes were hardened. Logistics were shifted underground and into sanctuaries. By 1967, North Vietnam had built one of the densest integrated air defense networks in the world. Radar, surface-to-air missiles, and anti-aircraft artillery layered together.
And the cost to the United States was anything but theoretical. By the end of the war, roughly 2,250 fixed-wing aircraft lost in combat operations. When helicopters are included, total aircraft losses exceed 8,000. That's not symbolic. That's sustained attrition without strategic decision.
And critically, those losses didn't buy leverage. They bought time for the enemy.
So while Washington was managing escalation, Hanoi was learning. Brian, how important was that learning asymmetry?
It was decisive. North Vietnam learned three things very clearly. First, the U.S. feared horizontal escalation. Second, bombing alone would not be decisive. Third, time was on their side. Once those lessons were internalized, air power could no longer coerce. It could only punish.
And punishment without decision just prolongs war.
Exactly. Rolling Thunder didn't fail because air power was weak. It failed because air power was constrained by a strategy that valued control over outcome. And that sets the conditions for everything that follows.
Okay, important pivot. Because if anyone is listening to this thinking, so air power just doesn't work, that's not the lesson here. At the tactical level, air power often worked spectacularly well. Brian, where did air power actually deliver real, undeniable results?
At the battlefield level, close air support, battlefield interdiction, and air mobility were indispensable once U.S. ground forces became heavily engaged after 1965. At Ia Drang in November 1965, air power stabilized U.S. units under intense pressure. At Khe Sanh from January to April 1968, air power made survival possible. During the Tet Offensive in January 1968, air power blunted attacks across South Vietnam. These were immediate, tangible effects.
Ground commanders trusted it. Troops depended on it. But
winning battles is not the same as winning wars. Air power was being used to preserve positions, not to resolve the conflict.
so air power was doing its job. It just wasn't being asked the right job.
Exactly. Tactical success bought time, but time without a political end state just extends the conflict.
That gap becomes especially clear during the Easter Offensive of March 1972. North Vietnam launches a conventional multi-corps invasion. Armor, artillery, regular formations. Brian, how does U.S. air power respond?
With massive force. B-52 Arc-Light strikes were surged in direct response. These weren't symbolic raids. They were operationally integrated attacks aimed at destroying massed formations, logistics nodes, and artillery positions. In places like An Loc, Kon Tum, and First Corps, Arc-Light strikes shattered North Vietnamese attacks and prevented ARVN collapse.
So this is air power doing exactly what it's supposed to do.
Yes, at the operational level, Arc-Light was devastating. North Vietnamese units were forced to disperse, pause, and reorganize. Attacks stalled. Momentum was broken. North Vietnamese sources later acknowledged the psychological and physical impact of B-52 strikes.
But
But even here, Success was conditional. Air power could halt advances. It could not eliminate the enemy's will to continue the war. Operational success did not translate into strategic decision.
Then comes Operation Linebacker I, launched in May 1972. And suddenly, things look different. Brian, what changes?
Restrictions are lifted. Targeting is coherent. Air power is used to deny sustainment, not just to send signals. Haiphong Harbor is mined. Rail lines are cut. Bridges are destroyed. This is air power applied with operational clarity.
Almost like letting the military fight the war.
Exactly. And the effects are immediate. North Vietnam's ability to sustain large-scale conventional operations degrades rapidly. Linebacker I demonstrates what air power can do when it's aligned with a clear operational purpose.
So was this the turning point?
Operationally, yes. Strategically, no.
Which brings us to Operation Linebacker II, December 18th to 29th, 1972, the Christmas bombing. This is often portrayed as the decisive air campaign. What do you think? Was it?
It was decisive in a narrow sense. Linebacker II helped push North Vietnam back to negotiations, leading to the Paris Peace Accords in January 1973. But coercion worked here because the United States was already leaving. Hanoi could sign, pause, and wait.
So air power forced movement, but not resolution.
The war resumes on Hanoi's terms. U.S. combat forces withdraw in 1973. American air power departs. And in April 1975, Saigon falls.
And this is where I'll bring in Clausewitz, once and only once. Clausewitz reminds us that war is shaped by friction, chance, and the passion of the people. Primordial violence, hatred, and enmity, not just rational calculation. North Vietnam's political will was not broken, it was delayed. So what does Vietnam actually teach us once the noise fades? Air power is powerful, but not magical. It amplifies strategy. It does not replace it.
The failure wasn't technological, it was conceptual and political. Air power was asked to compensate for unresolved political objectives and strategic ambiguity. And no amount of precision can fix that.
And that's why this episode still matters. Because every time someone says, air power alone can fix this, Vietnam quietly clears its throat. And that's where we'll leave it. If this episode made you uncomfortable, good. History is supposed to do that sometimes. Because the point isn't to feel smarter. It's to think more carefully the next time someone promises a clean solution to a hard problem.
Air power matters. It mattered in Vietnam, and it matters today. But it only works as part of a coherent strategy, one that connects military action to political outcomes. Without that connection, even extraordinary force can drift.
So next time someone says, we'll just apply pressure and see what happens, remember, history has seen that movie. And it does not have a happy ending.
If you want to go deeper, check the show notes for an article on this subject in our Substack, where we expand on the themes from today's episode.
As always, thank you for listening, thank you for thinking with us, and thank you for keeping military history honest. We'll see you next time on Mil History Talk.